What I've noticed is that the stories help people remember you better.
Mhm.
Every time I share a blog post and it's something informative wrapped up in a personal story, my click-through rate, the comment rate, the share, everything is so much higher than when I write anything else.
Hello, everybody. It is, well, hopefully your favorite time of the week. It is my favorite time of the week. It's Leaders Talk, and I am Andrew Dupy, as always, Chief Relationship Officer here at Leaders Press. And today I have from the Great White North, but with just discussing the heat, it's a little bit different there. But yeah, direct from Canada, we have Laura Beauparlant. So she is the founder and creative director of Lab Creative. And what that means is that she is an award-winning speaker, she's an author, she's a branding expert, and she's on a mission to help as many entrepreneurs as she can to turn their magic into authentic and memorable and impactful legacy-driven brands that ignite revolutions. So, Laura, how do you ignite revolutions? In the
Oh,
words of the Beatles, they say you want a revolution.
yeah. Well, thanks for having me. First of all, I'm super excited to be here and to just talk all things branding. So,
Absolutely.
what do I mean by revolution? It's kind of, it's kind of an edgy thing to put out there into the world that I want to
Mhm.
help spark revolution. So, I believe that we all have a gift to share with the world. And I think a lot of people hold back and we don't often think about that legacy that we want to leave in our lives, in our businesses. And so I believe first you have to spark the internal revolution,
Mhm.
right? Something has to change within you in order for you to fully embrace who you are and what your gift and magic is, and then put that out into the world. So you have to that revolution spark comes from inside, but something needs to shift. Typically, if you are not currently on that path to living a life that has an impact in whatever way, shape, or form that is, something needs to change. Otherwise, nothing will change. And we'll continue to go through the motions and live our lives and often get to the end and look back and go, okay, what's that impact and legacy that I'm leaving? And so I want to help people find that spark and ignite that inner revolution so that they can have that outward impact that
Yeah.
they truly desire.
That's so important too to the concept of branding, because I mean, when you're talking about branding, you're really talking about being able to communicate to an audience who you are internally. Isn't that right?
Absolutely. Yeah, whether it's a business or it's a personal brand, you need to have the heart in it. So there
Mhm.
needs to be a personality and story and the essence of that brand for sure. So that is hugely important.
So, how do what are a mistake? Something that CEOs, entrepreneurs, people that come in make when they're starting maybe a new company and making a new venture, something that they should probably do that they don't.
I think a lot of times people follow what is happening in their industry and
Mhm.
they kind of follow along and do what everyone else is doing. And a lot of people come to me and they say, well, that's not the way it's done in my industry, right? That's often one of those barriers, right? In a way, they're like,
Yeah.
but that's when I try to point them in a direction, they're like, ooh, but that's kind of out there. That's not what's typical. And so often people just follow the trends of what's happening in their industry rather than forging their own path. So that is a big challenge, is how do you really need to stand out, but a lot of times people are afraid to stand out because it can go back even as far as childhood. When you do stand
Mhm.
out, that's when, you get knocked down. That's when people notice you more and you're more open to judgment and ridicule or questioning and jealousy, whatever those things are. So that's often a thing that kind of stops people. And then I think a lot of times they end up being reactive. That's a
Yeah.
big problem I see, and a big mistake is that they're just reacting to what's happening, or they're really good at something. And so they just keep taking on more work doing that, or they build a business doing that. But actually, that's not their zone of genius, right? They're good at it. There's lots of things I'm good at doing. Doesn't mean I should be doing them. So we take those external cues from people. Oh, but you're really good at that. Why don't you do that for your business? Well, why would you stop doing that? You're really good at that thing. So I think it's that they don't take the time to build the foundation first. And that's what we do with so many of our clients. It gets that all of these ideas in their head, like, but there's this and there's that. And what are other people doing? And how can I stand out? And when you get that clarity and confidence, then you have a much better chance of launching something, even if you pivot here and there, of launching something to success versus just kind of throwing things out there and being inconsistent and unclear. So it's a lot of that. People think chicken or egg, like what comes first? I get the clients, then I work on my branding, or I work on my branding and then I get the clients. And a lot of people struggle with that idea of spending money before they've made any in the business.
Right.
And I think, what if you don't have a brand that attracts the right people or that will pay you what you deserve, or you get lost in the noise, then maybe you would never even make the money to pay for the branding, right? It's one of those,
Absolutely.
one of those questions.
You make a really good point there. And so let's kind of talk about the other side of that. What are success drivers? What are things that you have? And we talk storytelling. We'll kind of dig a little bit more into a few more of the stories that you have. But what are some key success drivers that you've seen in your experience that people that have started a new venture, or maybe launched a new product or service, or maybe pivoted, that has made them be able to stand out and be successful consistently?
I think it's when you kind of buck the trends and the norms, right? And it can be everything from, sometimes it's the colors you use and the way you speak and the way you dress. Like sometimes it's those subtle things, but it's often making really bold choices in your language and really being known for something. Whenever people are like, well, but they want to be people pleasers, right? They're like, but I can do everything for everybody. And then their messaging comes off a bit like, wah, wah, And so when I say I help people create a legacy brand that ignites a revolution, you're like, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
They either will want to know more, or they'll be like, that sounds too edgy for me, or I'm not looking to create any revolutions here. So you want to create messaging that is really powerful. And so the clients that I find have the most success are the ones that are really embrace that powerful language that I help them develop. And then they put it out there, right? They're not just sitting back going, okay, now we've done this. Now it's all just going to start flowing in. So they're willing to put themselves out there and be bold with their language. They're bold with their visual design and it really fits them, but then they're amplifying it. They are posting on social, they're writing, they're becoming thought leaders in their space. And so that's where that foundation piece comes in. If you've got the foundation, it's easier to build on top of that. And so the biggest success I see is the clients that they just embrace it and they're willing as well to put themselves out there, right? I've had people who we build the most amazing brand and then it's like crickets. They're not, and there's still maybe that fear of putting themselves out there. And so it's where you have the combination of those two things that really come into play in a beautiful way.
And that's perfectly leads into kind of what we wanted to dig into a little bit here. And that's the idea of storytelling. And I know the audience is, Andy, you're going to talk about storytelling again. Yes, I'm going to talk about storytelling again because it comes up so often in the podcast because it's such a powerful tool. So tell us a little bit about that. Maybe even give us an example of a story of your own that you might have from one of your success stories about what storytelling means to being able to brand yourself.
Absolutely. And I've been talking about this a lot lately, especially as we enter this age of AI and everybody's using tools, right? ChatGPT, they're like, oh my gosh, it's going to replace all these things. I use these tools, but it's only to enhance it, right? It's not to replace me because my stories can only be mine. So in order to help discern, people are like, how do I know if this piece of content I'm reading is just AI generated or if it's actually got a human touch? Well, if you have a story in there, then it's your story. Even if AI helped you write the piece, it's still your story. So I think it's finding a way to leverage those two. So that's just one quick point I wanted to make. So what I've noticed is that the stories help people remember you better. People, every time I share a blog post and it's something informative wrapped up in a personal story, my click-through rate, the comment rate, the share, everything is so much higher than when I write anything else. And I'll share a story that I used, and this is a kind of a case study of my own, but it was when I really started seeing the power of storytelling. Years ago, I went on a flight down the Hudson River at 1,000 feet in my dad's single engine airplane that he built. So like there's so many levels to the story. It's kind of cool. So we're flying down the Hudson River. You have to get a special like certification as a private pilot to even do this flight. It's pretty intense, so much air traffic. And I'm literally flying above Manhattan at 1,000 feet, looking down at the buildings. And I'm seeing Manhattan from a totally different vantage point. I'm used to going there and being in the buildings, looking up, the smells, the sounds, the sights, everything. And I was like, oh, this is what I do for my clients. I'm the 1,000-foot view. I see their business, the big picture of it, and I can see the vision for the future. My clients are in amongst the buildings. And so I shared the story of what I do through the lens of this story of the flight down the Hudson River with my dad. I showed pictures of me and his plane with him and really added that personal touch. I think I shared that in 2017, and I still have people reference that blog post because it helped solidify to them what I do. It's an easy story for them to retell to somebody else because they might not remember all the nuances, but they're going to go, oh yeah, she gives you that bird's eye view or that 1,000-foot view when you're too in the weeds in your business. It's an easy story for somebody else to retell. And so you start to notice that those are the stories that people want to hear, and it humanizes me and my brand, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it builds trust, doesn't it? I mean, that's the thing. You're now actually knowing who the other person is rather than knowing about them.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about pivoting then, because we've talked about the building a business, maybe starting a brand, but when you have that 1,000-foot view, I know that sometimes you say, hey, maybe you're on the wrong path. So what are the challenges in communicating that to someone that, maybe needs to rethink what they're doing and go in a different direction?
Yeah. And sometimes people come to that conclusion. They're like, something's not working. I know I need to pivot or shift. And so they know the business needs to pivot, but they're not necessarily thinking that their branding has to pivot. And maybe some of it they can keep, and maybe some needs to be adjusted. Maybe it is literally us, a tiny pivot, but maybe it's like a huge pivot, right? There's a lot of ranges in the term pivot, which is why it became a term that kind of scared people for a really, I feel like in the pandemic, it became a bit of a bad word, right? Pivot. Everyone was talking about pivoting, and it can be sort of a small step, or it could be very large. So it's looking out for the clues. If you're finding that, people are asking for things that you don't actually offer, or you don't want to offer any longer, or you're finding that there's a shift happening in your industry or market, so you're losing clients to that. If you're noticing there's little things that you can start to look at in your own business and industry with your clients. Are they willing to pay more for this? Are they not? What's happening? If you think about copywriters right now, lots of people are using tools like ChatGPT. Copywriters are scared. Okay, if I can no longer offer copywriting in this way, what could I do to now pivot to leverage AI and be at the forefront of copywriting, incorporating AI? I don't know, I'm making this up, but it's looking
we're doing
that. You have to be fully aware of what's happening. For us, we're researching all of the design tools with AI. My designer's got all the betas. We're researching it. We're learning different techniques. She's taking an animation course so we can animate our designs. We're constantly trying to stay on top of what's happening. So that's part of it. And sometimes you change as a founder. You're like, I don't actually want to do this anymore. So then you have to be strategic and go, does this brand fit the shift, or do we need to have a revolution? Like, is it an evolution or a revolution? And it sometimes it's, it is an evolution. I've worked with many clients where we're evolving their brand, and sometimes it's a full on revolution. So there's little clues to look at in your business and your industry to know, do I need to pivot or want to pivot? But then it's looking at the big picture, go, will this fit where I want to go?
Yeah. Do you feel that after 2020 and 2021 that you are running into business leaders that are more open to the concept of change than possibly before that?
That's a good question. I think so. I think people are starting to really, I've been talking about the creating like a heart to heart connection and that humanizing your brand for years. And I feel like now that's become even more important, especially when everything went from a lot of in person to everything virtual.
Yeah.
Suddenly, how do you create deep, meaningful relationships and connections? It's through video, it's through storytelling, it's through all of these tools that create a human relationship between your brand and your potential consumer or your audience. So I think I think we've sped up, right? The pandemic was one aspect, but now, online, and then now we've got AI tools, and I feel like everybody's feeling that acceleration, and we don't necessarily know where all of it's going, but I think people are a bit more nimble than we used to be. I think there used to be a lot of kind of little resting on laurels, just kind of going, we're good, we got this. And now we can't rest on our laurels in any industry, because every industry is being impacted by what's happening, whether it's the economy or war, AI. There's so much happening that we have to be cognizant of.
Yeah. And I say that because I'm thinking about, from our perspective as a business, we had some of our best years because of the shift that has gone from this. Because I think nowadays isn't branding or using services like yours or ours, where you're actually bringing in help, experts that know how to build these concepts, experts that know how to build out, that know the pitfalls, that know the success stories, the ways through the maze. Having that kind of help is so important now compared to what it may have been in the past.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, they might have had internal people doing some of this work. Then things shifted in the pandemic, and now because of the gig economy and remote work and all of these things, people are more used to working with people in different places in the world and hiring people from different, parts, places. And so I think there's a lot of flexibility in terms of what businesses are willing to do. Absolutely. And lots of businesses have been very successful if they've been able to make those shifts.
Yeah. So what are your lessons? What have you learned in your time? You said that you were doing this maybe even before everybody who was adopting these kind of concepts. What have you run into that may relate to our audience of just something you learned along the way that's just very valuable in helping you build your business out?
Every once in a while, I forget how important relationships are. And then I'm reminded. So whenever I start to follow the trends of funnels and emails and doing things a certain way, that's when I run into trouble. That's when I lose traction, when I start to kind of go, okay, well, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. So what I found is, there's obviously some typical business practices. There's, certain ways that really work and in terms of running a business. But whenever I really create something that aligns with me and is not necessarily the way that it's done in my industry or others, that's when I start to thrive. And when I really focus on building relationships. So going to events, speaking, being on podcasts, connecting with people on a human level, even if it's not talking about business or pitching business, it's just creating those deep relationships. That to me has been my biggest lesson. And it also is the thing that is the most fun for me and something I enjoy. And every once in a while I feel not guilty, but I'm like, oh, but it's so easy. This just comes so naturally to me and I enjoy it so much. And I think we often are taught that it should be hard. We have to hustle. And why does it have to be?
Yeah, isn't that
right?
true? I mean, it's so crazy because I brought up multiple times. I go and I watch sometimes very old sales videos from like the 1930s and 40s, and like, get out there and sell, Johnny. You got to go knock on those doors, and you got to follow the script. You got to know how to lead. In that kind of stuff kind of gets you into a rut. It's like there's a certain way that you must do it, and you always do it. And that to me has never been a way to actually make any kind of connections. And I think that the world is starting to learn that lesson, that those relationships are really what's important and really what you can always use.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. So I met somebody at an event I was at recently. He came to I did a talk, but we talked very briefly about branding. But we had some really great personal conversations, group dinner conversations. And then we'd been kind of messaging, and I just sent him a quick, hey, you're back home now. He'd been traveling. Hope you had a great trip. It's good to be home. He's like, oh, I don't know what's happening with Energy Goes, but I was literally just talking about you today with my business partner. We're going through a rebrand. Want to talk to you about working with us on a rebrand. It would be amazing. But we'd hardly even talked about, like, you know what I mean? So it's just about those personal touches, those little moments. That doesn't take a lot of time, but we often forget that sometimes it's just that outreach saying, hey, I was thinking about you. Hope you had a safe reentry back home, or that you had a great 4th of July celebration, or you had a whatever. And I think it's those little micro moments that can make a huge difference.
Yeah. And I think that's what a lot of our audience who are already authors have found, is that authorship really is still, it's a tool that we've been using for 10,000 years. And it's the one that just doesn't go away because telling your story through that way, for someone to actually pick up and read and connect with you in a book, the trust that you build in that is just automatically baked into the process, isn't it?
Absolutely. And when I wrote my book, I really wanted it to, when I worked with my editor, I said, I want somebody who knows me to read the book and hear my voice in their head. And
Yeah.
somebody who doesn't know me, I want them to read the book. And then if they meet me, go, you sound just like your book. Like, I wanted it to feel like I was literally talking to them and having this beautiful conversation about branding and making it very accessible. And that's absolutely what I achieved. My book is an extension of me. And actually, early in the pandemic, when I think you couldn't, like, books weren't shipping, like Amazon stopped shipping all of anything non-essential. And I was like, well, nobody can buy my book right now. So I actually went on social media, and every day at lunchtime, I read a chapter of my book live on like Instagram. And I'd never seen anybody do that, but I was like, well, this could be fun. Why not? And I just tried it. And I actually had 2 people who messaged me and said, obviously business is slow right now for them, and now is the perfect time for them to work on this. So I actually got 2 people signed up to work with me because I read my book for free live on social media over the course of a week. So it's that creative kind of out of the box thinking that I think that's where we are right now. And we're not at a place where AI can necessarily replace that. So I think it's really putting our creativity on, creative hats on, and getting ourselves out there as much as possible on video, in person, and really developing those relationships and your thought leadership.
Yeah. I mean, that's why we're doing what we do here now.
Yeah, exactly.
The podcast. I mean, everybody knows Leaders Press now way better than before we had this show and before we had the opportunity to actually sit and talk with other people. This is you learning about us. I mean, these things are all synergistic, aren't they? I mean,
absolutely.
They all interconnect.
Absolutely. And you never know where something's going to come from, right? There isn't always that direct, what's the ROI on this thing, this whatever, right? And it can be really hard to put, an ROI to something sometimes, but it's always easier to connect the dots backwards. But sometimes it's those little, like I said, those micro things, we're here having this conversation, maybe this will lead to somebody hearing us and working with me, or somebody that's from my audience learning about you and going, oh, I'm about to write a book. Let's talk. I think there's so many beautiful things like that can happen when you put yourself out there doing things like podcasts.
Yeah. The business butterfly effect.
Exactly. Oh, I love that. That's a great analogy.
I'll write that down. That may be my next book. All right. Well, Laura, we kind of have a segment here at the end of the show where we just have a moment for you to give a golden nugget, something that you have, something that maybe we haven't talked about, just a piece of advice that our audience can take with them and always use. Easiest thing in the world to ask. Give them the perfect answer.
Ooh, okay. I've got the perfect one. It's to teach from your scars, not from your wounds.
Okay.
So I heard this phrase many years ago at an event, and I was like, oh my God, that is words to live by. Because I think we often, especially when it comes to storytelling, we don't know what stories to tell. And a lot of people end up just kind of barfing their life onto social media. And it can be quite detrimental to their life and their business. And on the other aspect, people end up hiding behind sort of a veil because they don't know what to share. So when you can look at everything you might share through that lens, then that's a beautiful sort of framework. And so when I help my clients with their storytelling, it's like, is this my story to tell? Why do I want to tell the story? And will the story hurt somebody that I care about? So it's looking at all of the stories that you might have through that lens. And if you're in the middle of a business crisis or even a personal crisis, that may not be the time to go on social media and rant or scream or cry or whatever, because that can have long-term implications. That's a time to get the help personally and privately. But when that's healed and you're on the other side of whatever that crisis is, if it fits, then it's the place to share because you've learned from it and you've shown that growth. And I've used that framework myself and seen the impact of, because people don't always want to just hear about your big wins, everything that worked out perfectly. People also need to hear about the challenges you've had because that humanizes you too. And so they want to hear about those times, how you overcame it. And even if it didn't work out, they want to know. But when you're in the midst of it, it's not the time to tell it. So that teach from your scars, not from your wounds. It's such a simple phrase, but it's a lens to look through every story that you may want to tell.
That is beautiful advice. I love it. That is,
thank you.
And that is exactly what we wanted. That's perfect, Laura. So how can our audience find out more about you?
Absolutely. They can go to our website, which is labcreative.ca. You can find us on all the social channels. Lab Creative Inc. is our handle, sort of everywhere you might want to find us. And yeah, you can find my book on Amazon as well. It's called Brand Chemistry: How to Attract the Right Clients and Keep Them.
Excellent. And all of those links are, as always, down below, ladies and gentlemen. Laura, thank you so much for being here. It was an absolute pleasure, and we wish you the best of luck going forward.
Thanks for having me, Andy. It was so fun.